Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. As Ed said, we know how busy you all are, and to spend a few hours with us learning a little bit more about AWS and how our customers are using them, I think will be a great afternoon for you, and we're going to try and make it worth your time. It's great to be in Sydney. I love Sydney. We've been working on getting to this day in our business and in Australia for over a couple years, so collectively as a team we're excited to be here. So I thought I would start off today giving you an idea of how we think about what Amazon is now at the highest levels of our company. And we think about Amazon as having three macro businesses. We have a consumer business which sells consumer products and services. That business has been around for about 17 years at this point. Most people know about this business. It's several tens of billions of US dollars in revenue. And that business has continued to grow about 30% year over year. Our second business is our seller business. And this is a business where we allow third-party merchants to sell their products on Amazon's website. And it also provides technology for third parties to use to fuel their own website. And that business has been around for about 10 years as well. It's over $1 billion. And that business continues to grow very rapidly. And then the third business is the business that I'm here to talk to you about today, which is our AWS business, which is our technology infrastructure platform that allows other businesses and developers to build their technology applications on top of our platform. And that business is growing very quickly as well. So 6.5 years ago when we got started on this business, the most frequent question I got was, what's a bookseller doing offering compute and storage and database services? It seemed very surprising to people. I don't get that question quite as much as I used to. But we got it a lot initially, and for those that didn't know the backstory, it seemed very surprising that Amazon would be pursuing this type of business and also pioneering it. And there are a few things going on around the turn of the century that led us to believe there might be an interesting opportunity here for customers and for us. So the first thing was that we'd actually been working on this AWS business for a decade without really realizing it. And that's because to be able to scale Amazon, the retailer, as fast as we had to the first 10 years, we had to get really good at running deep infrastructure services deep in the stack, things like storage and compute and database functionality. And we had to get really good at running reliable, scalable, cost-effective data centers, because retail business margins are very, very small. So we realized that we had a real competence running infrastructure and data centers. So that was the first realization we made. The second thing was we started to provide this business that we call merchant.com, where we would provide technology for third-party merchants to run their websites. These were deals like what we did with Target, the big retailer in the US, where all of the technology on Target.com was Amazon's technology. And when we went to deliver that solution, it was way more painful and way more time-consuming than any of us ever imagined. And that's because the platform, as we had built the retail platform, had become much more entangled than we had hoped it to become as we built really quickly the first 10 years of the business. And so to decouple and disentangle those services to provide the solution to Target was painful, but it taught us a great lesson about how important loosely coupled services and service-oriented architecture, or SOA, is. And Amazon really got religion around the year 2000 about building that way and consuming services internally that way. That was the second thing going on at the company. The third thing was, around the years 2002 and 2003, Amazon was growing really quickly, and we were adding a lot of software development engineers, and yet it was still taking us a really long time to get software projects done. And it was really frustrating us. And at the time, I was working for Jeff Bezos as his chief of staff, and he asked me if I would go try and figure out what was going on. And when I went to talk to product development leaders, they said, look, I know you guys think these projects should take 2 to 3 months end to end, but we're spending 2 to 3 months just on the storage solution, or just on the database solution, or just on the compute piece. And Rob on the 5th floor is doing the same thing, and Jill on the 3rd floor is doing the same thing. None of what we're building scales beyond our own project, and it's frustrating. We're all reinventing the wheel. And that was a really interesting realization for us at that time, which was there was a real thirst internally at Amazon for scalable, reliable, cost-effective infrastructure services. And even if we had never released AWS to third parties, to the external customers, we would have built all these services just to let Amazon, the retailer, to move more quickly. And the fourth thing going on around that time was that we had a team on our retail business called the Associates team. And the Associates program is, we have about 1 million third-party websites that merchandise Amazon products. And if it ends up leading to a sale, they earn about a 5% commission. And that Associates team was trying to figure out how to be more ubiquitous across those 1 million websites. And they were trying all kinds of tests. And one of the tests they tried was they put all the product data, so the product descriptions, the prices, the customer reviews, the availability, they put it all in an API, and they thought if we decoupled the data from the presentation, our customers, our associates, will do more interesting things than we would have thought of ourselves, or we would have gotten, found time to do. And that test was a successful test. Sites that used the API versus those that didn't converted better. But what really surprised us was that thousands and thousands of developers flocked to this API despite the fact that we didn't do any promotion of it. And they used it for all types of purposes, many of which we didn't actually ever anticipate ourselves. And they started asking us if we would expose other parts of our platform that had nothing to do with our product data. And all these things started to come together around mid-2003. And we took a step back at the company and we said, well, if you believe that developers and businesses would build applications from scratch using these web services if the right selection existed, and we believed if the selection existed, customers would do that. Well, if you believe that, then the operating system became the internet, which was really different from what was the case at that time. And then, if you believe there was going to be an internet operating system, we asked ourselves, what are the key components of that internet operating system? Which pieces have already been built? And which pieces, given what Amazon's good at, could we meaningfully contribute to? And when we looked at that in mid-2003, we realized that none of the key components of that internet operating system had been built yet. And when we thought about what we were good at, Amazon was always a technology company at its heart. One that applied that technology to a retail business first, but always a technology company at its core. We realized we could provide most of the meaningful components of that internet operating system. And with that, we decided to pursue this much broader mission, which is AWS today, which is to enable businesses and developers to use web services, what people call the cloud now, to build sophisticated and scalable applications. And that really, with that broader vision, that is what we set about going to build. And so we've built over the last, really we started working on this in late 2003. So over the last 9 years, with 6.5 years in the market, we've built a very broad and robust technology infrastructure platform with a number of layers, as you can see. And so, ooh, I went fast. On the global infrastructure side, think of regions as different geographic places around the world where we have physical infrastructure. And in each of those regions, we have multiple data centers. And think about data centers as availability zones. Availability zones, customers that care about high availability applications will architect their applications so they run in multiple availability zones, so that if there's a problem in any one availability zone, their application can fail over and continue to operate until that problem subsides. So regions, availability zones, and then we have a number of edge locations for our content distribution network, or points of presence, or POPs. We have about 30 of them now. On the networking side, we have a number of capabilities that help our customers. We have something called Amazon VPC, or Virtual Private Cloud, which effectively allows customers to cordon off a part of our network, launch AWS resources into them. They can be accessed either only through IP addresses that customers bring to bear, or through an internet connection if they enable that. And then they connect via VPN to a customer's data center. So it really becomes a natural or logical extension to customers' own data center topographies. We have something called Direct Connect, which allows customers to connect directly through a private connection to our availability zones and our regions. And then we have something called Amazon Route 53, which is our DNS service that customers are using in very large numbers. On the compute side, we have, of course, Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, which most people know about at this point, which is our compute service. But then we have a number of capabilities we provide with that, including the ability to use our load balancing service, which is Elastic Load Balancing, as well as to use auto-scaling, which lets you set triggers about when you automatically want to scale up more instances or servers, or scale them down. On the storage side, we have a very large object store called Amazon Simple Storage Service, or Amazon S3. We have persistent block storage for our compute service called Amazon Elastic Block Store, or EBS. We have a storage gateway that we launched this year, which is a virtual gateway that allows customers to effectively take data that they're storing on-premise and asynchronously store them in the AWS cloud, or they can look at their total data that they have on-premise, take only the piece that's hot and that they feel like they need to cache and serve locally, and store the rest in AWS. And that's something that enterprises are using in very large numbers now. And then AWS Glacier, or Amazon Glacier, that we launched just a couple months ago, which is our very inexpensive, very durable archival and backup storage service, which is just 1 cent per gigabyte per month. So that also is the fastest adopted service in the history of AWS after 80 days in terms of the number of customers using it. On the database side, we have 2 different types of database services. We have a relational database service that we call Amazon RDS, a relational database service. And we started with a MySQL edition. And then over the last couple years, we've added Oracle, and we've also added SQL Server. And then we also have a service that we call Amazon DynamoDB, which is a non-relational, NoSQL database service that is very fast and very low latency. You can get single-digit millisecond latency on gets and puts with Amazon DynamoDB. And DynamoDB, in terms of revenue, is the fastest-growing service in the history of AWS. So this is another service that we launched just this last year that's growing very quickly. We have a number of app services or application services. So we have a content distribution network that has the most customers of any content distribution network in the world, called Amazon CloudFront. We have a search service called Cloud Search. We have a caching service called Amazon Elasticache. We have a big data service that we call Amazon Elastic MapReduce, which is really a Hadoop implementation on top of EC2. We have a workflow service called Simple Workflow. And then we have a number of messaging services. We have Amazon Simple Queue Service, which is a queue service. We have Amazon Simple Notification Service, which is a notification service. And then we have an email service called Amazon Simple Email Service. So a pretty broad set of app services. And then we also have an ecosystem that's very vibrant, that's building all kinds of additional app services that our customers are also using, that range from security services to logging services to all kinds of developer services and business intelligence services and test and disaster recovery. And then we have a number of deployment and administration options. So we have a monitoring service that we call Amazon CloudWatch. We have fine-grained identity and access management capabilities that we call Amazon IAM, or Identity Access Management. And then we have a number of ways for you to provision and deploy resources. So if you're using our building block services like EC2 and S3 and RDS, and you want a visual GUI to do it, we have the AWS Management Console. If you want to deploy recipes or templates to different types of workloads, we have something called Amazon CloudFormation, which lets you more readily do that. And then there are a number of customers who like to use drop-in containers where effectively they upload a file to us, and then we will provision the instances for them, set up the monitoring, set up the load balancing, set up the auto-scaling. And we have a service called Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, and we have that available today in Java and PHP and .NET and now Ruby. And then we have an ecosystem that's providing a lot of the complementary services as well. There's a number of app containers in there like Heroku and AppFog, and you'll see a bunch of other deployment services that help our customers move more quickly in putting their resources on top of AWS. When we were building AWS, we had very animated debates early on about at what level should we draw the line, how many choices should we make for customers, how much functionality should be in the early releases, how much capability should we give customers. And there were a number of our very smart people internally who thought that we should make a lot of those decisions for customers. We shouldn't allow them to hurt themselves, to stub their toe. And we decided that we're going to build the services at a very low level as building blocks with very high flexibility, and we didn't want to be paternal. We wanted to let our customers stitch applications together however they saw fit. Because one of the lessons we learned when we were thinking about this business is that customers will do all kinds of interesting, clever, surprising things that you wouldn't imagine with 15 people in a room. And so one of the outcomes of that decision of building these low-level building blocks with high flexibility for customers is that you see that every imaginable workload and application is being run on AWS because the services are so generally useful. So you see all kinds of business applications, and most of the very large enterprise application workloads now, or applications, are all certified to run on AWS, including SAP and Oracle. You see all kinds of web apps, whether they're internal or external facing websites or games or social applications or digital or media distribution. You see them all. You see a lot of big data and high performance computing being done on top of AWS. And then, of course, a lot of archival and disaster recovery. But really, every imaginable workload in every imaginable vertical segment is being run on AWS right now. We have hundreds of thousands of customers in over 190 countries. And those customers range from some of the most successful startups like Pinterest and Dropbox and Spotify to large enterprises like Netflix and Shell and Samsung and Schneider Electric and Adobe to government and public sector agencies. We have over 300 federal government agencies that are using AWS at this point, and over 1,500 academic institutions that are using AWS. So very broad, diverse customer base. And then a very large, vibrant ecosystem. And we think of the ecosystem in two general categories: systems integrators and independent software vendors, or ISVs. And you see the SIs that range from the Capgeminis and Deloittes and Cognizant and Infosys and RightScale, to ISVs that range from SAP and Oracle and Microsoft and Red Hat and Dassault and Wipro and Citrix. Very broad and growing ecosystem that makes it easy for our customers to run the applications they're used to running on top of our platform. I mentioned that we have hundreds of thousands of customers using AWS in over 190 countries. I thought I'd just give you a couple other data points of scale. Our storage service, Amazon S3, you can see now is storing over 1 trillion objects, and at its peak runs well over 750,000 requests per second. So very large scale in our services. This is an interesting data point. Every single day right now, AWS is adding enough new server capacity to have powered all of Amazon as a global company when we were a $5 billion enterprise in the year 2003. So every single day, we're adding enough new servers to have served a global $5 billion business. It's a lot of capacity we're adding, and it's growing very fast. We're also iterating quickly. So you hear a lot of companies will say, we listen to our customers, and then we're going to innovate and move quickly. And it sounds very good, but it's not so easy to do. If you look at the pace of innovation in AWS over the last 6 years, it's been very, very rapid. So you can see that in 2010, we had over 60 major services and features released. Last year, it was over 80. This year to date, it's well over 100, and we believe we'll be at over 150 this year. So we are iterating and innovating very quickly. We have a global footprint that's pretty broad at this point and continuing to grow. So we have 9 regions. We have 1 on the East Coast of the United States, 2 on the West Coast of the United States, Europe, Singapore, Tokyo, South America, and then we have a government-specific cloud in the U.S. called GovCloud that meets something called ITAR compliance, which in the U.S. a lot of workloads require this ITAR compliance where only natural U.S. citizens work on that. So until today, that has been our regional footprint, and then you can see we have almost 30 points of presence for our content distribution network. So I thought I would give you a take, at least our take, about how technology is changing. And there's certainly no shortage of noise and opinions about what's happening in the cloud. And you can believe what you want to believe, and there's a lot to read. But at least I thought I'd give you our take as AWS and as having been very deeply involved in the cloud now for 9 years. So I think that we're in this world where there's a new world of IT that is changing what the old guard and the old world of IT has been for the last 30 years. So in the old world, you had high capital expense when you were building technology applications. You have to lay out all that capital up front for the data centers and for the servers, whether you use them or not, but you lay it all out up front. In the new world, you get to turn that capital expense into a variable expense. So instead of laying out all that capital up front, you only pay on a variable basis as you use it. In the old world, old guard technology vendors basically charged as much as they could charge you. And by the way, it's a completely legitimate business model. It doesn't happen to be ours, but it is a legitimate business model to just charge as much as customers are willing to bear. And the prices were high and they were fixed, and there weren't a lot of alternatives for companies that were building a lot of technology. That's changing. In the new world, you have, instead of paying a large capital expense, you pay a variable expense. That variable expense is lower than what almost any company can do on their own because we have a large amount of scale that we pass on to customers in the form of lower prices. And you only pay for what you use. That's a very different model, again, of consumption of technology. And you can see we have a pretty interesting dynamic going on that we will call this virtuous circle, which is that as we attract more customers, we have to build out more infrastructure, like I was mentioning earlier, every day how many servers we're adding. As we build out more infrastructure, it means that we have more economies of scale, which means that we're able to lower our infrastructure costs. And when we're able to lower our infrastructure costs, we're able to reduce our prices to customers, and that actually attracts more customers. So there's a very nice feeding on itself virtuous circle. And that's one of the reasons you've seen us over the last 4.5 years. We've lowered our prices on 23 different occasions in the absence of any competitive pressure to do so. In the old world, you got some project, you have some big initiative, you have to guess on how much capacity you need. And any of you that have had to do that know that that's a little bit harrowing. It's very, very hard to predict what a customer response is going to be to something new. In the new world, you don't have to guess anymore. You get to scale seamlessly up as you need more capacity, and you get to shed it and give it back to us and stop paying for it if you don't need it anymore. So this is a chart that I think kind of illustrates it. You can see in that red dotted line, that's what many of us had to do in the old world, which was we had to guess what our capacity was going to be. And in many cases, something like that green line is what your actual was. So you can see in the beginning, you were wasting all kinds of money and capital by being over-provisioned. And then, when your application started taking off, you actually didn't have enough, which meant you were either going to have a bad customer experience, or more likely, you're going to run around like a chicken with your head cut off and find someone who will give you that capacity quick, commit for 2 or 3 years, way overpay, and then have to live with the waste associated with that. No more. In the old world, if you need a server, see you in 2 to 3 months, sometimes 4 months. And if you ask customers at companies of any size how long it takes them to get a server to try something new or to put something in Integ, we got answers when we were surveying at the beginning of AWS that ranged from 6 to 20 weeks. That is maddening, 6 to 20 weeks. You know, if I'm an engineer or if I'm a product development leader, it's going to really discourage me from innovating if it's going to take me so darn long to get a server. So now, when you go to the cloud, you can spin up hundreds, even thousands of servers in minutes. That completely changes the game in terms of what you can get done and how quickly. Anybody that does a lot of innovation will tell you that the two most important things is that you have to try a lot of experiments. And then if those experiments fail, and if you're doing enough experiments, many of them should fail, that you don't have to live with the collateral damage of failed experiments. Well, in the old world, you couldn't get them quick enough to do many experiments, so teams learned helplessness and learned not to innovate very much. And then if they were wrong, they had to live with that overhead of the failed experiments. In the cloud, you can spin up thousands of instances, and if they don't work, give them back to us. You don't have to pay for them anymore. Very different world. Trying to turn this, I promise you. over here. There we go. And this is a good example of what I was just talking about in this new world. So this is a video application called Animoto, which is actually, if you've never used it, it's a super cool application. It allows you to take all your photos and pick some music that you like, and it will build a video presentation for you. And then it has technology that matches some of the music intonation with your photos. It's very clever. And in any event, this is what you were seeing. They were kicking along for a long time with using AWS for a couple hundred EC2 instances or servers. Think of those as servers almost. And then all of a sudden, they built a Facebook app. And that Facebook app had an initial bump, which you can see on that first arrow. But then they optimized that Facebook app in the next week or so. And all of a sudden, they needed 5,000 incremental instances in about a 36 to 48-hour period. Now, in the old world, what would they have done? They probably would have had a bad customer experience, a bad first impression for a lot of these customers, or they would have way over-provisioned and lived with that overhead. In the new world, they scaled up seamlessly, and then you can see they reached a peak, and then they actually didn't need that much after they reached that peak and they did all their email notification marketing. And so they just gave us back that capacity and didn't have to live with the overhead. Today, they're many times bigger than this graph, but it's illustrative of what I would just say. So in the old world, you had to manage, when you were managing your own infrastructure, you had to manage all of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that we call infrastructure. And this was, negotiating for servers, installing the servers, operating the servers, migrating the servers, managing a heterogeneous fleet, figuring out who your bandwidth provider was going to be, managing the network, operating all of this when there are issues. It's not brain surgery, but it's hard work and it takes real resources. And in most cases, it hardly ever differentiates your business. And so in the new world, if you can take those scarce resources, who are your software development engineers, and instead of having them have to manage the undifferentiated heavy lifting of the infrastructure, instead let them work on things that truly differentiate your business and your mission, it's a huge advantage. It's a huge advantage. So this is one of my favorite myths, and it's one that I hear propagated a lot, mostly by what I would call old guard technology companies. And this myth has taken a couple different forms in the last 6 years. In the beginning of the cloud, you would hear people say, oh, cloud computing, there's nothing new about cloud computing. Cloud computing, that's just virtualization. It's the same thing. And of course, it's not, because cloud computing encapsulates not just the hardware, but it's software, hardware, and data center services wrapped in a service. And then eventually, some of those old guard technology companies acknowledged that because they saw that the cloud was getting a lot of traction. And then they said, what you really need, yes, you do need the cloud. You're right, you need the cloud. But you need the private cloud. That's what you need. And then you started seeing all of these large technology companies effectively slap the term cloud on top of their existing products and say they had cloud products and sell them to customers. And of course, if you study what the benefits are of the cloud, and what I was just talking about, the advantages of the new world of IT, nobody is moving to the cloud because of the word cloud. The reason that there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of customers moving to the cloud are the benefits. And so if you look at what the key benefits are, which we think of as converting capital expense to variable expense, a lower variable expense than you can do on your own, paying only for what you use, elasticity up and down. You don't have to manage the infrastructure yourself with those scarce resources who are software development engineers. And self-service, the private cloud has none of those advantages for why hundreds of thousands of customers are moving to the cloud. They don't have those benefits. The only one maybe you can say could be a benefit is self-service, because if you set it up right, maybe you can have better self-service than you have today. Except actually, if you look at the data so far, this is James Staten, who's the lead analyst for the cloud for Forrester. He pointed out that when they actually did a survey of companies that have tried to put in a private cloud, only 12% of them really had self-service capabilities. So it's not really even that. So then you ask yourself, why are so many large technology companies trying to tell customers that they should use the private cloud when it doesn't have any of the benefits of why so many customers are actually moving to the cloud? And I think the reason is that what's happening in the cloud, this revolution that we're in the early stages of seeing right now, is really disruptive to old guard technology companies. These are companies that have operated on 60 to 80% gross margins for 30 years. This cloud movement is not going to be a 60 to 80% gross margin business. It's going to be a very high volume, low margin business. You think about the world radically differently if you're a high volume, low margin provider than if you're a 60 to 80% gross margin provider. You think about your pricing differently. You think about your cost structure differently. You think about where to spend your innovation cycles differently. If you can take cost out of your own cost structure, whether you pocket those as savings and profit or whether you pass them back to customers in the form of lower prices, you think about that differently. Now, Amazon, in every single business Amazon is in, has always been a high-volume, low-margin provider. We love those types of businesses. We're very comfortable operating those types of businesses. We have that DNA. Large, old guard IT companies who've been running on 60 to 80% gross margins are not so excited about those types of businesses. They're very disruptive. And so you'll see, there's all kinds of, fear and uncertainty and doubt, FUD that you'll see thrown out there, and all kinds of delaying to try and stop customers from moving to this model because they're not quite sure what to do with their existing businesses. But I believe customers are smart, and you're seeing them vote actually with what they're doing with their workloads. That's why the cloud is growing so fast. And I believe that even many of these old guard technology companies will realize that the business is going to be, cloud computing on the infrastructure side is going to be a high volume, low margin business. And then it'll be interesting to see how many of those companies are actually good at running those, because you don't flip a switch and become good high volume, low margin operators. It's totally different operating skills. So that will be very interesting to watch as well. So today we're announcing a new region. You guys, many of you have probably heard the news. Our team is just so excited. We have been thinking about, planning, working on this new region for about 2.5 years, since the first time that at least I was here about 2.5 years ago. And today we announced our newest AWS region, the Sydney region. Which we're really excited about. And that launched at midnight, I guess, this morning, and customers are already using the Sydney region. And several of the advantages that you have, first of which you'll have all the same services that customers have gotten to know in AWS and the other regions. One of the interesting things is that even prior to launching an AWS region in Sydney today, we have over 10,000 customers from Australia and New Zealand using AWS in regions outside of Sydney. So you will see all the same services in the Sydney region. And then what we heard from a lot of our customers who were using AWS outside of Sydney, and then from other customers who we've been talking to for a couple of years about using AWS, was that they wanted us to have a physical presence here in Australia. And typically the two main reasons were, one, for their end users, whoever were going to use their applications, they wanted to have lower latency inside country. And so the Sydney region will have single-digit millisecond latency to Sydney, so very low latency. And there are some companies, either for compliance or regulatory reasons, or just because they're more comfortable with it, who want their data to reside in country. And so, of course, the Sydney region will allow customers to have their data reside inside Australia. And we have, as I mentioned, we have over 10,000 customers already before we even launched the Sydney region using Australia and New Zealand. And those customers range from startups like Halfbrick and BrandScreen to medium-sized businesses like Red Balloon and MYOB and Think Education Group, to enterprises like the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and the REA Group and Qantas and Huru, to government agencies like the City of Melbourne. So a broad and diverse group of customers, and we're just on launch day. And then a significant and growing ecosystem of systems integrators and ISVs. And on the SI side, you'll see Bulletproof Networks and Dias and Frond. And on the ISV side, you'll see MYOB and Deputy.com and Shine. So again, very large and growing ISV ecosystem. And then I'll share some closing thoughts with you. So we get asked a lot, especially as more and more companies are now pursuing the cloud as a business and an opportunity, because it's such a large opportunity as a business segment, but also it's such a great value proposition for customers, as we've been talking about. And we get asked, what are some of the keys? What are some of the things we should think about in who we work with in the cloud? And I would point to a few. The first is experience. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, we got into this business 9 years ago because we felt we were pretty good at running infrastructure services and reliable, scalable data centers to grow Amazon, the retailer, as fast as we did. And yet I can tell you that 6.5 years after being in the market with our services, with every imaginable use case, all over the world, hundreds of thousands of customers, we're much better at it today than we were 6.5 years ago. There's really no compression algorithm for experience. So that's the first thing. Second thing is flexibility. What customers have told us from the start is that they don't want us to tell them what operating system to use or which programming languages. They don't want us to tell them that they can either use all our services or none. They want to make all those choices themselves. And so that's why we've built a platform that supports all the operating systems, all the major application platforms, all the programming languages, and customers can use any number of our services and stitch them together however they want, which for us seems self-evident but may not be as obvious for some other large technology companies with some legacy issues there. I tell you, look at the scope of functionality of the infrastructure platform. If you look at the array of services, AWS has about 30 services now in our technology infrastructure platform, and the features within those services, the functionality is much more robust in AWS than any other cloud provider by a large amount of margin. And if you look at the pace with which we're innovating and iterating and offering customers new services and features that they tell us are important to them, again, much faster than you'll see anywhere else out there. Companies, not just large global companies, but even startups today are launching their businesses with global end users right from the get-go because of the nature of social networks and the way the apps system works and in some of the mobile and tablet space and just the nature of the internet. And so customers that care about the customer experience for their end users really want to put their applications in physical infrastructure that's close to their end users. So the fact that AWS has 9 global regions and multiple availability zones in each of those regions is very, very compelling to customers who want the experience to be lower latency to their end users. And then last, I would say cost. I've been at Amazon for over 15 years. I've worked on every business that we've been in. And every business that we do at Amazon, we start with the customer and then move outwards from there on our strategy. And I have never met customers in any of these businesses who want to pay higher prices. It's just never happened. And so even sometimes I talk to customers and we're talking about how much lower cost the cloud is, and some almost look indifferent to it at times. I would say they're the minority, by the way. But I would say many of those same customers a year later have been very compelled by the fact that the cost structure is lower to run on the cloud. And so I think, look, when you look at the uncertainty of the markets that exist, having a lower cost option to run your infrastructure as long as it's reliable and secure enough, which AWS has proven to be, is very advantageous. And then working with a partner who has a track record and has a disposition of consistently looking to take cost out of their own cost structure so they can give them back to you in the form of lower prices, that is really compelling. So these are some of the factors that I think should be important in your decision of who you're choosing to use as a cloud provider. And then I'll close by saying, in the fullness of time, I don't know how long this will be, but I see us right now at being at a similar stage to where we were 150 years ago. 150 years ago, in fact, most businesses generated their own electricity, and they did it on premises, and it seemed completely natural. That's what you did. And then, as the electricity grid came along, the economies of the grid were such it didn't really make a lot of sense to go through the trouble of generating your own electricity. And I think that we're in a very similar stage right now. We're at the beginning of this shift where I don't know if it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but in the fullness of time, Very few companies are going to own their own data centers. And those that do will have much smaller footprints than they have today. And that's because the economies and the benefits of the cloud are so compelling that it's not going to make sense to run your own data centers over time. So with that, I will say thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the agenda this afternoon.